Oh, happy Easter, everyone. So this is a very short list of a couple of recommendations for some modern Christian films that I would recommend giving a try. Now, I want to explain some of the criteria. So I wanted to find things that were after Passion of the Christ. And I know Joker Voice had asked me about why faith-based films, why Christian films are usually subpar, why they're not excelling, why they're not getting over the hump. And I will say that I tried to include some of the caveats and issues with these films that I picked. And I want to explain why I think other films I wouldn't put on the list. For instance, a film like God's Not Dead. I feel like God Not Dead was radically criticized for just being an awful premise, which I thought was really pretty unfair because I even knew as I was writing news stories of instances where, the atheist school representative was pressuring Christian kids unfairly. And I didn't think the premise of the film was as much of the problem as the execution of the film. The finances are a major problem for these films, not because they can't get maybe a talented star or director, but because they don't have the money for everything else, the lighting in that film, the editing in that film. They don't have money for script doctors. Like so many of these films just fall short because they don't get edited down right. They don't have someone in the room who's trying to tweak it just to make it level it up a little bit better. It's the downgrade in quality in all of these other levels is usually where the problem is. However, there are some that I think do okay. I also think that one of the things that they don't get credit for, I do enjoy biopics. I'll be perfectly honest. I really enjoy true stories. I think this is an arena where faith based storytelling works very well because you're basically just telling someone's story. Sometimes, though, it gets very heavy handed. But I think more times than not, those tend to be the more enjoyable ones. And most of the criticisms are very unfair because it is based on something that actually happened. Now, I will admit, like, I can only imagine I didn't care for the ending of the film because they manipulated it so much. It was an amalgam of two or three things that happened. Yes, they should have cast a different actor for the young version of Bart in that film. Things like that. They can't get out of their own way in some of those cases, but there are some good films out there. And this is just a very list. I picked three films. I was going to pick a longer list, but because of time and things like that, I didn't get to a longer list. These are my three. Tell me what you guys think. And then stay tuned at the end. I'll give you some wrap up thoughts and some other ideas as well. Take care. Risen 2016. Josephine starts as a Roman tribune, like a official, a right hand of Pontius Pilate in this story about Jesus' crucifixion and hence the name resurrection, right? But what his name is Clavius is basically a detective who's an authority who's been given the responsibility to make sure that Jesus was killed and his body doesn't get stolen so the believers won't stage a resurrection and create a rebellion. And the Jewish leaders have evoked Pilate to do this, and that you have to then look for the body because this guy is like, they're Romans. They don't believe, they believe in pagan gods. He prays to a god at one point, and Tom Felton, yep, Draco Malfoy, which he plays Lucius in this, so that was a little weird, by the way. It's sort of his like a little apprentice, and they're being sent around to try to follow these little clues of who his believers are, where the body is, who took the body. They dig up graves to look for bodies that have been crucified, those kinds of things. And he's a battle worn guy. Like there's a shot of him fighting and covered in blood and being this soldier that's loyal to the Romans. And I thought it was a very interesting take on the Jesus story. And sure, it's another Jesus story. It's about a resurrection. Spoiler alert, you know where it's going to go. But I will say, for the first hour or so, this movie is really, really excellent, and all of its execution is very, very strong. The second half of the movie does become a bit, heavy-handed, right? The journey of an unbeliever, seeing is believing. It's a little on the nose, right? Some of the things that they do with actual scriptural stories are very, very heavy-handed because they're sort of like shoehorned in, like, we're going to put the net on the side of the boat and all the fish are going to get in it, and he's going to heal a leper, and do you love me? And some of these things don't necessarily play as well, and it creates an unevenness in the pace and the structure of the film. But it does show that with a little bit of money and a little bit of attention, an interesting spin on a very familiar story can deliver a good product. And I think it is an entertaining watch. Like I said, I think that first hour or so is very, very good. The little bit of the third act is a little bit of the problem with how they handle it. But again, is seeing believing? Would that be enough? That is, it's a question that's literally like spoon fed to you, the audience, in the film, which I think is a little too heavy handed. But I like the idea of I don't see miracles, so therefore I don't believe. When in fact, maybe you don't see miracles because you're not looking for them in the right way, whereas something like this is this massive miracle that would be so in your face. Would it just still dumbfound you? Interesting topic. Risen 2016.
Woodlawn 2015. The true story of Tony Nathan, who was at his high school called Woodlawn during the desegregation in 1973. He's an amazing athlete. Tony Nathan went on to play in the NFL, play for the Miami Dolphins, went to Super Bowls. But here we see the racial tensions of the time mixed with a chaplain who integrates into the system to help create some, I guess, motivation. He's described as a motivational speaker, but obviously he is trying to invite them towards Christianity, gives them an invitation to follow Jesus Christ, to see each other as brothers rather than as racial enemies. It involves the two schools. The other school is Banks, the opposing, menacing team that no one can really beat. And it is really great to see the players integrate amongst themselves, change the game for the better, and also create a narrative for the community for them to build around. So it's true to life. Tony Nathan and obviously Jeff Rutledge plays the quarterback at Banks, who both went on to the play at Alabama and play in the NFL. I think John Voight as Bear Bryant, the Alabama coach, has some really great moments. Just a little bit shy of like that Oscar thing. Like it just can't quite get over the hump. This probably is my favorite of the Christian films that are on this list, but it is just a little bit shy. I also like C. Thomas Howell as Shorty White. I think he has a great role. Really, really, really transformative role. I really like him. He's kind of fun. It's a great balance, I think, of everything. Really, this film did not perform well at the box office. It opened opposite a bunch of big films like Bridge of Spies and Goosebumps, and just didn't quite find its legs to do well at the box office. But at the end of the day, I think it is. It's a really, really good film. Very enjoyable. Hopefully, you would like it a lot.
Priceless 2016. This is another true story, James Stephen, and it has to do with what I think is one of the topics that isn't talked about in Hollywood. Sure, 2008, we had Taken. It did talk about human trafficking. This is a different spin on that, and it is a very like personal project of the Smallbone family. Ben Smallbone directs it. His brother Joel, who's one of the lead singers of For King and Country, stars as James, and he's driving this box truck across the country, straight through drive. Turns out he has two girls in the back, two Mexican girls that are coming to America for the dream, right? They got to make money because their dad owes probably a cartel money, and they don't realize they're being trafficked. He doesn't realize they're being trafficked, but when he does, the guilt and the pressure of it all just really weighs in on him, and he has to come up with this sort of like rescue scheme to get himself out of it, particularly inspired by someone that he meets named Dale, who's a hotel manager who doesn't want any part of all the shadiness other than pushing back against it. Now, is it the greatest and whatever? Super low budget, by the way. um, Joel Smallbone is not a professional actor. I thought he did a great job. Amber Midthunder, who everybody knows now from Legion or Roswell, was in Prey. She does fine as the younger sister. I think all the performances and stuff are really, really well. It's just that you have a very small story, a small budget, trying to tell a very challenging story that is inspired very much from real life people and real life circumstances in a topic that is very difficult. They got a PG-13. Maybe it should be a rated R film. Maybe it would be more intense to shock people more into dealing with this if they just pushed the envelope just a little bit further. But at the same time, that wasn't what they were trying to do and trying to accomplish. And I have to include Priceless on my list because I think that there needs to be a lot more risk taking in Hollywood. There needs to be topics that shouldn't be so taboo. And I can hear Hollywood executives going, "Well, no one wants to sit through that. No one wants to watch that." Sure, Taken is like an action film, right? They intertwine this horrific situation around an action, a Liam Neeson action film, right? Priceless is a little more gritty, right? It's more like in the weeds. You know, you have the corrupt cop, you have the pimp, you have these poor girls, you have references to like the photos and the internet and how things are managing. In a few little pieces of things, I wish that they had kind of fleshed out. And again, this is why I wanted to include it because I think that It did what it could for what it had, but it shows that there is room here to navigate into something, especially with another true story based on inspired by true people and true events. Priceless 2016. Okay, so that is my little list. I was going to add a couple other films, and due to time constraints, I didn't have them. And I because I also wanted to explain more. So, for instance, one was called The Remaining. It's a film that takes place at the Rapture, right? And it's a micro budget film. I mean, I don't even know they spent $1 million. It's probably like hundreds of thousands of dollars. But the premise of the film and some of the execution of the film was done very well, especially for such a low budget film. And I think they should deserve a little bit of credit or a look for something that they got really close to going horror, but not quite. They did certain things, but just not quite good enough, right? Unplanned and the Gosnell movies both deal with a topic that Hollywood is scared to death to talk about. Both those films are rooted in real life stories, real life testimony, real life court evidence. And I have to admit, I really enjoyed both of them. However, they're kind of heavy handed. But the source material is, what do you do with that, right? At least they're willing to try. So tell me if you've seen any of these things: Risen, Woodlawn, Priceless. I enjoy them. I've regularly rewatched them. I know there are issues with each one. I think I covered those, I think, pretty fairly. I'd love to think and hear about your thoughts, which ones you've seen or enjoyed, way completely off base, those kinds of things. I'm not trying to say any of them are tens or anything like that. I'm not that, but I think these are strong films that are in the right direction. I think the Irwin are good filmmakers. I think that Sony has a nice faith-based arm of filmmaking that they've done really well, investing some money. So I think there are some avenues where there are some decent films. And if you have some that you think I should watch, I haven't watched all of the Chosen TV series. I want to try to get to that. I know that has been really praised as far as being higher quality. So I really want to get to that. And there's some other stuff as well. And I also stuck with Christian stuff. I didn't get into like Kantara, which is an Indian film. Very interesting film. It deals with their religion and their beliefs and things like that. That is a superior film to all three of these films, to be perfectly honest. But again, Indian film, almost 3 hours long, heavy sort of concepts of something that is very different than what we would be used to in the West. But I enjoyed it a lot. So anyway, that's my list for this. I hope you guys have a great Easter. I didn't want to get more into things that people are already talking about, like the biblical epics. We did Ben Hur on Talk Hard, those kinds of things. But a few other films that maybe you haven't heard of. That's what I was hoping for. Anyway, love to hear from you guys. Thank you so much. Have a good Easter. I'm Pops.